President Zelensky thanked President Trump for the support of the United States, especially the Javelin missiles that President Trump was first to provide in his efforts towards peace. The leaders agreed Ukraine and America will continue working together to bring about a real end to the war, and that lasting peace under President Trump's leadership can be achieved. President Trump fully briefed President Zelensky on his conversation with Putin and the key issues discussed. They reviewed the situation in Kursk and agreed to share information closely between their defense staffs as the battlefield situation evolved. President Zelensky asked for additional air defense systems to protect his civilians, particularly Patriot missile systems, and President Trump agreed to work with him to find what was available, particularly in Europe.
That was White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt reciting the official White House readout of yesterday's phone call between President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. It was a little bit odd, though, because she had to be prompted by a reporter's question to share this information several hours after the call ended. In the last 48 hours, the Russians have engaged in the largest attack on Ukrainian energy sources in the war's seemingly interminable history, which then saw the Ukrainian side respond by blowing up part of a Russian airbase where nuclear bombs are located, creating this ominous mushroom cloud. So, just how much closer to a peace deal are we in the aftermath of Trump's phone calls with Russian President Vladimir Putin, and Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky? Now, according to a Truth Social post by Trump immediately after the phone call with Zelensky, he claims to have, quote, just completed a very good telephone call with President Zelensky of Ukraine. Much of the discussion, Trump said, was based on the call with Putin the other day in order to align both Russia and Ukraine in terms of their requests and needs. Trump has suggested that we are on track, but the events in the last 24 hours don't seem as if that is so. Joining us now to help us understand more of the Ukrainian perspective is Halina Yanchenko. She's a member of Ukraine's parliament. She's also an anti-corruption activist. Halina, thank you so much for joining our show.
Hello, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure and a big honor too. Thank you.
Thank you. So here was my perspective, because I've covered the White House now for essentially a decade. I know that usually those readouts come pretty close on the heels of the end of the phone call, or especially in those events at the top of the briefing, you would immediately get the readout or a portion of it verbally stated by the press secretary. It seems as if the Trump White House didn't want to immediately comment in a strong way on the phone call. My team felt that it might not have went as well as Donald Trump had suggested. How does the Ukrainian government feel that phone call went?
Well, one thing to start with is that we believe that United States is a strong country and is a true global leader, and that President Trump is capable of helping to end this war. So there are a lot of hopes that are put on Trump's peace initiatives. Moreover, Ukraine is very interested in the end of the war because we've been suffering. I should remind that Ukraine is the victim of unprovoked war of aggression by Russia. So it was Russia who is bombing Ukraine for 3 years, killing civilians, ruining electricity and energy infrastructure, breaking all international legislation. So we, as a victim, we want to end this war, but it depends on the occupant to cease fire, to start basically the occupation and stuff like that. And that is why during the negotiating meeting at Saudi Arabia, it was Ukrainian peace negotiators who suggested the very detailed thing, the 3 components to start with. So I should remind you that it was Ukrainian suggestion to do air ceasefire, sea ceasefire, and full exchange of prisoners of war. Why these 3 components? Because it's very easy to actually track the results. And it will be very easy to show which country is eager to end the war, which country is eager to actually demonstrate the goodwill, and which is blocking the peace. So we in Ukraine, we trust in Trump, we trust in United States, and we hope that these three components, as something to start with, will be communicated through the phone calls between President Trump and Putin. And we are very interested in the feedback of how it goes. I'm not sure what was the content of the call between President Trump and President Zelensky, so I can't comment on that. But what Ukrainians really hope for is the things that I mentioned.
You also mentioned or noted that in particular Ukrainian energy sources and energy infrastructure has been a particular target. One of the things that President Trump did propose was for the U.S. to own Ukraine's energy plants in order to protect them from future Russian attacks, because it would be, an attack on the United States if then attacked based on the ownership. Here's what he said. Listen.
President Trump also discussed Ukraine's electrical supply and nuclear power plants. He said that the United States could be very helpful in running those plants with its electricity and utility expertise. American ownership of those plants would be the best protection for that infrastructure and support for Ukrainian energy infrastructure.
So he proposed to President Zelensky U.S. ownership of the energy infrastructure in your country. Is that something that the Ukrainian people would accept or support?
There was a discussion of one particular nuclear electricity station in Zaporizhia. Actually, it's like a bit behind of Zaporizhia. This is the biggest nuclear electricity plant, not only in Ukraine, but in Europe. It has 6 blocks and produces up to 6 gigawatts of electricity energy, if I'm not mistaken. But the thing is, because of Russian occupation, this nuclear energy plant is not working for 2.5 years. So basically, Russians are damaging Ukrainian economics, Ukrainian electricity, and generally the well-being of the whole this part of the world. So yeah, we are interested. Details should be negotiated, of course, and they should be discussed, but we are interested in deoccupation of this nuclear air plant. Russian soldiers should leave. Russian soldiers should demine the nuclear plant, because they actually put a whole bunch of mines there, which is dangerous, which can cause a huge ecological tragedy. We are interested in them to leave, and we are ready to actually restart this nuclear electricity plant with Americans. In addition, I should say that we are also inviting American companies to come and invest in Ukrainian production in the in our natural resources, and in order to be able to actually drill those resources and process them, we all of us will need electricity. So American companies together with Ukrainian companies, or the joint fund which was discussed between President Trump and President Zelensky, will need electricity. And that's why, of course, we are very interested in Russians deoccupy this nuclear plant and joint efforts of US and Ukraine to restart the plant.
So that one plant in particular, but in infrastructure in general, electricity infrastructure in general, Ukraine is open to, say, U.S. companies investing and having a level of ownership. Yes, just to clarify.
I think we should start with this particular one because it has problems caused by Russians. And I believe that with joint efforts, we can actually solve these efforts, as well as many other problems caused by Russians because of their war of aggression.
I want to move on to another sticking point within the negotiations. That's, of course, the continued supplying of Ukraine by the U.S. with weapons, munitions, and defense resources. That was something that the two presidents, President Trump and President Zelensky, also discussed on the phone call. Donald Trump did say that he would help Ukraine acquire American-built Patriot defense missiles from European allies in NATO. That's been a non-starter for the Russians. In fact, this Moscow-based journalist, Dmitry Simes, said this earlier this week on this show about why Russia will never sign an agreement until they have guarantees from President Trump that all weapon shipments to Ukraine will stop. Take a listen.
Yes, but in the Kremlin readout, they explicitly state that one of the preconditions for a full 30-day ceasefire would be the cessation of Western arms and intelligence to Ukraine. The readout on the Kremlin side didn't make any, indication of Trump's response, and the White House readout didn't make any indication of the White House's response. So I think that this is an issue that's going to be worked out. And that if you want a peace process with the Ukrainians, you have to make sure that they don't get any opportunity to rearm, to rebuild, and to prepare for a new war.
So basically, Zelensky's asking for more, munitions. Trump has agreed. Russia's saying that's a non-starter. So how do we move past this? How do we move past this impasse to get some kind of peace resolution?
Yeah, let me start with commenting that it's odd things to hear that Russia is afraid of Ukraine to be prepared for another war. It's Russia who've been the most aggressive country on this continent. It's Russia who keeps occupying independent nations. They did mass in Moldova 30 years ago. They actually started 2 wars in Chechnya. They occupied 20% of Georgia. Then they invaded Ukraine in 2014. And then they started full-scale invasion of Ukraine 3 years ago. So it was Russia who is constantly preparing for war and occupying independent nations basically next to their borders. So everyone should be concerned of Russia and Russia's capacity to actually keep occupying other independent countries, not Ukraine. Ukraine was never invading any other country. We don't need anything. We are happy with what we have in our country. We want to actually invest in our economics. We want to invest in our well-being. And we are a peaceful democratic nation, unlikely Russia. So this is one thing.
Yeah.
Second thing that I want to say is that actually Russia managed to occupy a lot of Ukrainian cities and villages, especially in the beginning of full-scale invasion 3 years ago. And United States of America, as well as Europe, were reluctant with military assistance. And it did not stop Russia from continuing the full-scale invasion. While our Western partners and allies were afraid that military assistance to Ukraine will actually will stimulate Russia to be more aggressive, it turned out that it works vice versa. When Russia does not receive any adequate answer, when Western countries, Western or civilized world is not stopping Russia from actually breaking the international legislation, it stimulates Russia. So therefore, I highly appreciate and I'm basically praising what President Trump did. He said that until basically Russia ceasefire, agree on the 3 components suggested by Ukraine, ceasefire in air, ceasefire in sea, and exchange of prisoners of war, there should be military assistance to Ukraine, because otherwise, as a victim, we won't be able to defend ourselves. And we are defending. We are not occupying, or we are not invading anyone. or any other countries. So it's very important to understand who keeps on, who keeps occupying, who keeps kidnapping kids, who keeps actually killing civilian population, who keeps ruining civilian districts on a daily basis. It's Russia. It's not Ukraine. It's obvious, and now it's also obvious for President Trump, and it's great. And that is why, once again, we are very interested in this partnership with the U.S. We are interested in the peaceful negotiations and in U.S. leadership in this process.
Yeah, we'll see how this goes. It looks like the last 2 days of calls didn't really do anything to de-escalate. And I did just see that earlier today in Norway, President Zelensky shot down the idea of U.S. ownership of energy infrastructure, but it sounds like perhaps other Ukrainians would be more open to this. So we'll see if his comments from today stick. Zelensky has kind of went back and forth some on what he's willing to do. So we'll see. In the meantime, it seems like the attacks continue, particularly on energy infrastructure. Thank you, Helena, for joining us with the latest from the Ukrainian perspective. We'll keep covering this in depth because this is, of course, one of the top focuses of the Trump administration at the moment. Thank you so much, Helena. It's nice to meet you.
Thank you.
You, my friend, need Native Path collagen. Made with only type 1 and type 3 collagen fibers, these are the two most important types that make up 90% of the collagen in your body. It's found in cartilage, bones, skin, hair, nails, your gut. Type 1 and 3 provide maximum benefits without the need for unnecessary fillers. Also, Native Path collagen has no additives, no artificial sweeteners. It's also completely flavorless, which is important because Native Path collagen can be added to anything. I put it in my coffee. Also, because of its special peptide formulation, it mixes more easily than any other collagen I've ever tried, and I've tried a lot. But the best part, Native Path offers amazing bundle deals. You can get 3 or 6 packs at a fraction of the price of other brands. Plus, they have a 365-day no-risk guarantee, making Native Path the trusted choice. All you have to do is visit getnativepath.com/truth. That's getnativepath.com/truth to start your transformation. Well, unfortunately, the war in Ukraine continues on despite the allegedly positive calls between President Trump and Putin and President Trump and President Zelensky. You just heard in the previous segment about how Ukraine, everyone involved is expressing optimism, right, about the prospects for peace. Yeah, still sounds like there is much distance between the proposed peace deal and war. And what will that ultimately peace deal even look like? I mean, consider this. Most reports suggest that Ukraine has lost 20% of its territory to the Russians and nearly a quarter of its overall population since the war began. Those people are unlikely to come back. In many cases, they've been killed, sadly, and in others, they were made refugees and have no real inclination to return post-war torn Ukraine. I'm now joined by a resident in-house geopolitical analyst and author of A Disaster of Our Own Making, How the West Lost Ukraine. Brandon Weichert joins us now, who was listening in on that last segment. Brandon, I just want to start with some takeaways. You and I both had the same immediate feeling about how the call with Zelensky went, because we know how these things usually work. You've worked in this space. I've covered this space for so long. The fact that we didn't get a readout immediately said a lot about how that call really went. And then now over the last 24 hours, we see that the attacks on energy have continued. Zelensky is saying that Russia is making unwarranted demands that will never lead to any real talk. So it seems like we might even be a little bit farther away than we started at the beginning of the week. So what do you make of where we are right now and what you heard in that last segment?
Well, I think the key thing here to remember is, hope springs eternal, and Trump, as I've told you before, is touched. So he might be able to pull it out of the fire still. I don't ever go, count him out, but it does sound like we're farther away from a deal. The previous guest was talking about how the Ukrainians were sort of these passive bystanders in this whole event. And it's true, the Russians should not have invaded. I don't think that anybody thinks that the Russians should have invaded, maybe outside the Kremlin. But ultimately, the Russians, there's another side to the story. The Russians were provoked. For 30 years, and I show this in my book, for 30 years, the Russians told American leaders going back to George H.W. Bush, do not make Ukraine part of NATO. Do not allow it to be used as a base from which to threaten Russian territorial sovereignty. And every president since George H.W. Bush all the way through to Joe Biden, with the exception of Donald Trump, every American president has pushed the NATO alliance into, if not directly absorbing Ukraine, working strenuously toward making Ukraine a backdoor member. And that is the real trigger point of the war. And so your last guest, understandably, she's a representative of the Ukrainian government. She wouldn't admit that. But until we acknowledge that, and until the Washington bipartisan establishment, the deep state, comes to grips with this, we're going to keep finding ourselves in a situation where peace is not going to be finalized, because the Russians have made it clear the weapons transfers from NATO to Ukraine must stop. And what happened in that phone call that we do know is Trump promised to continue the weapons transfers. And that is really even more than territory. That's the key sticking point. And your last guest, of course, didn't like when you brought that up, because everybody knows it is ultimately about the weapons, because that's how Ukraine and NATO is able to threaten Russia.
And because, do you think that's why Russia continued its attacks or resumed attacks after promising not to on energy infrastructure? Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. No, I think that's the key thing, because Putin told, and I think Dmitry Simes, who you had on the other day from Moscow, was saying intelligence sharing and the weapons sharing has got to stop. That's a precondition, I think, is what Dmitry said. And that's the one thing that we won't stop. So, of course, the Russians are going to exploit any opportunity they have to deal more blows to the Ukrainians.
I want to get to something else that Helena Yonchenko just said. She might not have seen this yet because it just got reported, but Zelensky, while in Norway, had shot down Trump's idea of, this U.S. ownership of energy infrastructure in Ukraine. She, as a representative of the Ukrainian people, she's a member of Ukrainian parliament, sounded like, well, there has to be worked out details, but there could potentially be some kind of agreement or partnership there. So she sounded a little bit different than President Zelensky is sounding today on that.
Yeah, I noticed that too, and I think that's a very key point. We know that Petro Poroshenko, the former president of Ukraine, and Yulia Tymoshenko, who's an opposition leader to Zelensky, the two of them in the last few weeks have met with Trump administration officials behind the scenes to discuss what comes after Zelensky. And what I just saw while I was in the green room waiting to come on, that somebody's tweeting out, and I don't know if this is official, but basically something like 40% of Ukrainians support Donald Trump's effort to get peace, which is directly at odds with Zelensky and his regime. And so I think at the very least, what you could be seeing is the formation of real counterparties to Zelensky within Ukraine. And your last guest, I mean, I told you, I think she's very lovely. I think she's very smart. She might even end up being somebody who might be a counterpoint to Zelensky, notably on this issue. Just one last thing I'd like to add about the energy. I wish Donald Trump would not float these ideas, because what that does is it's making America become more committed to Ukraine. Because once America says we'll take the nuclear reactors over and manage it as sort of a tripwire, Russia would never dare to attack us. Well, if Russia feels sufficiently threatened, if they think Trump is not working fairly, they will continue the war. And yes, they will risk shooting at Americans if all else fails, because they're in a war of existential survival. That is how Putin has built it. So I think what we should be doing is not offering any more to get more involved, which is what Trump kind of did, whether he meant to or not.
That did concern me as well, because I'm not convinced that Russia will deter just because it's U.S. owned, and then we find ourselves in not just a proxy war, but in direct conflict.
Which is, of course, what the British
Russia
and the French would love, and the Ukrainian regime would love.
Well, that's and that brings us to another geopolitical analyst Glenn Deason tweeted, just a couple days ago, or just a few days ago. in that, in 2022, essentially, we were kind of close to having some kind of agreement in the Istanbul Agreement, but the U.S. and U.K. sabotaged the peace agreement in order to pursue this long war that we find is still happening today, as NATO could use Ukrainians to weaken a strategic rival. All the way back in March of 2022, Decent notes, Zelensky warned there are those in the West who don't mind a long war because it would mean exhausting Russia, even if this means the demise of Ukraine and comes at the cost of Ukrainian lives. Are these same Western pressures still behind Zelensky's holding out on key sticking points with peace negotiations? Is he being backed up by Western politicos?
I think you're putting it politely. I think he's being controlled by a cabal of neoliberal and neoconservative globalists who very much want to collapse the Russian state, and they see the Ukraine war as the way to do it. I'll tell you what a two-star Air Force general told me in 2022 out west at an undisclosed location. We got into it, he and I, because I was sharing my opposition to the war, and he said, "Mr. Weicker, don't you understand? We're bleeding the Russian army in the field for nothing." And I said, "General, I go, you're bleeding it out using Ukrainian lives and our money to do it. I wouldn't say for nothing." He said, "But that's a small price to pay." And so that is the narrative that has taken hold in the minds of most U.S. military officers.
Real quick, we have 1 minute, and we're not going to have time to really go on this in depth, so we're going to have to hit it next week, and that's Turkey. There are some things going on, getting no notice. It's possible that Recep Erdogan, President Erdogan, has actually fled Turkey. Have we confirmed that news?
I cannot get a confirmation yet, but this is the story to watch. You lose Turkey, you lose NATO's southern defense perimeter, and also, who knows what's going to happen in Syria. But if Erdogan goes and his opposition, Social Democrats, take over, it might be better for us, actually.
Yeah, we'll see. There's actually a flight tracker showing a flight that could have possibly been carrying the Turkish leader. We don't know if it has. There were reports he might have been going to Russia, but that maybe Russia didn't accept him. So there's lots of unconfirmed reports, or we're working to confirm. I've reached out to the Pentagon. I know you've reached out to people. Maybe by next week we'll have an answer, and then we can talk about what, if he has, what this could mean, particularly for Syria. As we've also been focused on covering that, right, Brandon?
Absolutely. Well, Turkey's the main backer of the violence in Syria against Christians. So,
a little known fact, I actually got to ask Erdogan a question about Syrian Christians all the way back in 2019. It was one of my first opportunities to get to ask a question of another world leader. I'll never forget that, and perhaps we'll bring that back next week when we talk more about Turkey.
Yeah,
thanks, Brandon.
You should. Thank you.
Are you looking for monthly income without the risk of stocks because you don't feel like maybe you're well versed enough in the stock market? Well, here's something you won't hear about on CNBC. There's a unique way to collect royalties directly from America's most productive oil fields. No exploring, drilling, or operational headaches required. You simply collect checks month after month. And the best part? You can get started with just $25 through any brokerage account. The Oxford Club's chief income strategist, Mark Lichtenfeld, breaks down what he believes is the #1 oil royalty play for 2025. Simply visit RobinsonOilBoom.com now for more information. That's RobinsonOilBoom.com. RobinsonOilBoom.com now for more information. That's RobinsonOilBoom.com. I know you all remember these harrowing videos from last year out of an apartment complex in Aurora, Colorado. It depicts members of the violent Venezuelan prison gang Tren de Agua, effectively taking over that apartment complex and shaking down the people who live there. Tren de Agua's members have entered the country illegally and were protected by the Biden regime from deportations. Now, an Obama-appointed federal judge is attempting to stop President Donald Trump's mass deportations of the gang members here in the United States by claiming that the White House is improperly using the provisions of the 1789 Alien Enemies Act to deport these gang members. According to that judge, Tren de Agua does not qualify as an enemy alien organization. But according to two Venezuelan dissidents who are hiding for their lives from the Nicolas Maduro regime in Venezuela, that is precisely what Tren de Agua is.
He sends out their paratroopers, and yes, some of them does include Tren de Aragua, which is an arm, it's a strong arm for the Maduro administration.
In fact, another person who was once close with Maduro's government described Tren de Agua's relationship with Caracas and how and why the paramilitary group was even in the United States to start with.
We have to understand also something of the Tren de Aragua, the TDA. It's a state-sponsored Maduro regime organization. They learn how to do that because Maduro taught the prison gangs to do that. Tarek El-Aissami, who was Secretary of Justice in my country, he studied criminality and he understood the criminal mind, but it's not for good. He used that for evil, and he understands the criminal mind, how to use the criminals to control the society, the Venezuelan society first, and then, well, that is a big opportunity also to spread this for all Latin America, to take the virus like a socialism virus all over Latin America, and then go to the U.S.
So it's safe to say this is bigger than Tren de Agua. And join us now is Mr. Patrick Byrne to talk to us about what is potentially a 4D chess move on the part of President Trump. Patrick Byrne has been trying to educate the public via PowerPoint presentations on the Cuban-Venezuelan threat that has been posed and infiltrated into the United States, particularly one you did recently or a couple months ago, 45-minute, very in-depth presentation on Venezuela that explains some of these, paramilitary activities and how they tie into the larger picture. So thank you so much, Patrick, for joining me today.
Always an honor. Always an honor, Emerald. I love being on your show. I love your work. The best journalist in America, I think.
That means a lot to me coming from you, Patrick. Let's start, though, with the 1789 Aliens Enemies Act. Let's look at the language in that provision, this piece of legislation that he's using. It says whenever there's a declared war between the United States and any foreign nation or government, or any invasion or predatory incursion is penetrated, government and the president makes public proclamation of the event. All native citizens, denizens, or subjects of the hostile nation or government being of the age of 14 years and upward who shall be within the United States and not actually naturalized shall be liable to be apprehended, restrained, secured, and removed as alien enemies. Why, Patrick, is President Trump and his administration on sure footing with the deportation of Tren de Agua according to this particular piece of legislation?
The Alien Enemies Act could have been written for the Tren de Aragua. First, your previous guests were right. Let me emphasize. First, the guy they showed, Tarek El-Aissami, who was the vice president of Venezuela at one time. Tarek El-Aissami, that's a Lebanese Shia name. That's in Iran. Iran has deep reach into the Venezuelan regime, which is to say Hezbollah. He's basically the Hezbollah representative in there. And the Iranians have mastered this. When they have demonstrations against the mullahs, they don't need any more secret police to beat up the people or kill the people. They have gangs of thugs who come in with 2x4s and beat the hell out of the protesters. And they just say, well, it wasn't us, it was these factory workers. Well, they've moved that model to Iran. From Iran to Venezuela. In 2009, the real mastermind of the Venezuelan regime is a psychiatrist. I think of like Hannibal Lecter. His name's Jorge Rodriguez. His sister is now vice president. The two of them went to the worst prison in Venezuela, which is in a town called Aragua. And they made a deal with this prison gang that we will let you out and you will run, you'll be for us, like I just described, they use the thugs in Iran. So they've killed thousands of political dissidents. If you're a political dissident against the regime, it isn't necessarily the secret police who go up. It's some straight up killers. And these are the worst of the worst, the kind of people. We were dealing with one fellow that Venezuela found out he was dealing with us. They took his brother, carved him up alive on video camera, and sent the video of it to the guy's mom. They chopped him up alive. That's these kinds of people. That's Tren de Aragua. It's 20,000 man strong. And here's what else happened. They got a whole bunch of them got moved to Colombia, where the Colombian government, which is now a narco-terrorist government, the former leader of FARC is now the president of Colombia. His election was rigged for him by Venezuela. He's in cahoots with Venezuela. They took 20,000 of these people and gave them Colombian IDs. Nicaragua then took them from Colombia, and then the Sinaloan cartel came and took them from Nicaragua and infiltrated them into the United States. There's probably 20,000 of them here. Several thousand of them are straight up terrorists. In the south of Venezuela, they've turned the south of Venezuela into terrorist training camps. And these 20,000 people, along with many other tens of thousands, have become fully trained terrorists down there. And they're the ones who have infiltrated here. So this could not be more spot on for the Alien Enemies Act. And this could not be right. It's right in the middle of the fairway. So, of course, we have this judge who turns out to be a no border guy. His daughter is a big no border NGO type. They've raised, they just don't believe in borders. These people want to take down the USA. I think their goal is to destroy it. And we have I'll close this diatribe on one last piece of information. If you look up, I don't know if I've even told you this, but if you look up, about 2 weeks ago, Maduro, the president of Venezuela, went on television and said, hey, basically, in Spanish, and I'll send you the clip. He said, don't get angry at me, America, for sending all these people here. Biden told us to. Biden contacted us and told us, dump all these people on America, and I've got the proof. The world's journalists are welcome to examine it. So the president of Venezuela is saying, don't get mad at us. We were told by Biden to send all these people to America. So I think that's pretty clear proof Biden wanted to collapse the U.S. This Obama crowd wants to collapse the U.S.
And that's very important, Patrick, what you're saying, because I don't think the general American public, and even those in the Trump administration, understand how deeply infiltrated our judicial branch, our government institutions, and our academia, all of our institutions really have been, right? And when you think of a country like Venezuela, you think, oh, that's kind of a failed regime, right? It's a narco state. What power do they really have? Which brings us to another gang that we haven't been talking about as much, Cartel del Sol. There's a CIA operative who's went public. His name is Gary Bernstein. He had this to say late last year about this particular group. Take a listen.
In the last 20 years, the Cartel del Sol has stolen $1 trillion from Venezuela's national oil company, PDVSA, and embezzled $500 billion from its national treasury. It not only has, but continues to produce and smuggle 25 to 40 metric tons of cocaine every month out of its country into the world. The Cartel del Sol is a $2 trillion transnational criminal organization and the most well-resourced criminal syndicate in history. Through bribery and investments of its funds, it controls 12 countries and world leaders. It has massive investments in the U.S. and European financial markets and institutions.
It controls countries and peoples across the globe, Patrick. We've also now learned, this kind of went unnoticed, but on March 10th, the New York Post reported that the FBI is actually stepping up operations and looking into specifically Cartel del Sol. Why is this significant?
Oh, this is very significant. And I know Gary quite well. Gary and I have been working together on and off for nearly 4 years. And I know Gary very well. Many a night smelling each other's BO in some lousy motel in a third world country over the last few years. Gary is a wonderful fellow. Gary's also is a very famous CIA guy. Here's the issue. We think of the cartels as Mexican, the 4 Mexican cartels, or the Sinaloan, which was that movie Sicario. It was really about the Sinaloan, the Gulf, the Jalisco Nueva Generation, and the Zetas. And they range from like really, really bad guys to absolute terrorists, but that's their range. But what we don't really get in America is those four groups are the junior partners. The senior partner in the cartel organization is the Venezuelan cartel. The Venezuelan cartel is the granddaddy cartel. And there's another name for the Venezuelan cartel, and that is the government of Venezuela. Because Venezuela is where cartel mafia turns into nation state. And the mafia, the cartel of Venezuela took over the government. And that's why they actually call it, incidentally, the cartel of the suns, cartel de los soles. Because in Venezuela, most nations on earth, a general in the army has a star on his shoulder. But in Venezuela, they have a sun. And when they say the mafia, the cartel of the de los soles, mafia of the suns, what they mean is the generals in our army are the heads of our mafia. Or put differently, the heads of our mafia are generals in the army. That's the way to understand Venezuela. The mafia leaders are the generalissimos of the military and the president. That is the mafia. So the mafia is the government. And so it is the senior partner, really the middlemen. These guys, the Mexican cartels are just the middlemen. And MS-13 and stuff, they're all dangerous and they're straight up killers and stuff. But the real center of gravity of it all is the Venezuelan mafia, which is the Venezuelan government. So talking about Cartel de los Soles is you might as well be talking about Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro. These are the leaders of that mafia. And like I say, the brainchild or the brain power in the mafia, that's Jorge Rodriguez. He's the brain power. Now that's the president, Maduro. The brain power is that psychiatrist and his sister. They are the center brain, and the sister's now vice president, slated to become president. These guys are all straight up killers and thugs. Like I say, and there's a $25 million bounty on my head from them at the moment. So, not making any friends.
Rodriguez says, besides being, she's now vice president. He's former vice president. They're very politically connected here in the United States. They're also tied to a specific company, right, that we mention a lot when it comes to elections. Yes?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll tell you all about it if you want. When this mafia took over Venezuela in '99, and they all come in talking about social justice and such. I've been in Venezuela. I was in Venezuela 7 years ago while there was cannibalism in this, and I mean, it was so poor. Everyone had lost 20 pounds on average, but not the people in government. I was as a guest of the government. And let me tell you, anyway, the government, they've looted, Gary said $1.5 trillion. I think he secretly thinks they've looted $3 or $4 trillion over their 25-year reign. But anyway, they became, if you're that mafia and you steal, Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world, bigger than Saudi Arabia. If you take in that country and you're just going to loot, first thing they did is they took the oil company, they nationalized it, and so they could just loot the oil of proceeds of the biggest oil pump in the world. What else are you going to do? You got to steal the election commission, because that way you can never get voted out. So the two things the mafia took over once they took the government were the oil company of Venezuela, which is called PDVSA, and they took the election commission, which is called CNE, Consejo Nacional Electoral, and the CNE. So PDVSA and CNE. So once they captured that election council, they wanted to create a system where they could never lose an election. And they had created some software that was riggable. And they commercialized that software as a company called Smartmatic. Smartmatic's just the commercial go-to-market vehicle for the Venezuelan mafia / government. And then Smartmatic's technology, by a series of corporate divestments and licenses agreements and blah, 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 ended up as the core technology of the three main manufacturers who are out there, who are Dominion, ESS, and Hart. At the heart of their technology, it's When you vote on that equipment, you're voting on software that is actually, when you get through all the corporate licenses and shells and all this stuff, this really goes all the way back to the Venezuelan mafia. So that's why this is, and what we're experiencing in this country is a very long 25-year overthrow of our republic. As you point out, we look at these banana republic countries and say, how could they do this? In Cuba, they train their soldiers with broomsticks because they can't afford rifles. But we're wrong about that. They're very, very sophisticated when it comes to espionage. Everything communist, everything Leninist. Lenin was a great theorist of this stuff. They're very good at subversion. And they haven't tried to overthrow us with guys with guns, like in the movies. They've overthrown us by subverting our election system and over 2 decades getting technology into it that they can bend and shape elections.
Patrick, I'm so glad we got to go over this because I want people to begin to understand the framework of this, because we've seen Donald Trump use the Alien Enemies Act to deport Tren de Agua, and now we know the FBI is looking deeply into Cartel del Sol. And I want people to understand why these moves are being made. It's part of a larger picture, and we're going to be covering this in great detail. Remember those names, the Rodriguezes, Jorge Rodriguez. I'm just going to tell my audience that, but we wanted to give them a primer, and this was a fantastic primer. And if you want to know more about this, like I said, Patrick posts these on his X account, these PowerPoint presentations in great detail so that you can get the basis of understanding for, what we're seeing and why you see Donald Trump talking a little bit more about Venezuela now in this second term. Right, Patrick?
Thank you so much.
Okay, now Patrick, I want you to stick with me through the break because you reveal so much. You've also become a target of not only Venezuela, but the Biden family. And there's some developments on that front we've been reporting on this show this week, and I want to get your take on that just after the break. We'll be right back. MyPillow is excited to announce that they're having the first ever mega sale on overstock clearance and brand new products. Save over 50% on this season's flannel sheets. You all know that's one of my favorite products. Also save 30% on their brand new My Crosses. They come in both men and women's. They're made right here in the good old US of A. Get the 2025 6-piece My Towel sets for only $29.98. And of course, the best-selling standard MyPillow, the Icon, just $14.98. So to take advantage of the first ever mega sale, all you got to do is go to mypillow.com and use the promo code TRUTH, mypillow.com, promo code TRUTH, or call the toll-free number you see at the bottom of your screen, 800-944-5396. But wait, remember that $75 free shipping rule? Wow, that ship is sale because right now every single order ships absolutely free no matter how much you spend. And that's the absolute truth. You, my friend, need Native Path Collagen, made with only type 1 and type 3 collagen fibers. These are the 2 most important types that make up 90% of the collagen in your body. It's found in cartilage, bones, skin, hair, nails, your gut. Type 1 and 3 provide maximum benefits without the need for unnecessary fillers. Also, Native Path Collagen has no additives, no artificial sweeteners. It's also completely flavorless, which is important because Native Path Collagen can be added to anything. I put it in my coffee. Also, because of its special peptide formulation, it mixes more easily than any other collagen I've ever tried, and I've tried a lot. But the best part, Native Path offers amazing bundle deals. You can get 3 or 6 packs at a fraction of the price of other brands. Plus, they have a 365-day no-risk guarantee, making Native Path the trusted choice. All you have to do is visit getnativepath.com/truth. That's getnativepath.com/truth to start your transformation. You'll recall we've been bringing you exclusive coverage of Hunter Biden's defamation lawsuit against Patrick Byrne in California, where a DOJ official under the Trump DOJ was caught communicating with Biden's legal team in violation of the judge's orders. That DOJ official failed to appear this week. His name is Sam Bean. And joining us again to respond to this firsthand is the subject of this defamation lawsuit, Mr. Patrick Byrne himself. Thanks for sticking with us during the break. We've been talking about this for the last couple of days since the hearing in a Los Angeles, Zoom hearing the other day about your defamation case, where it became very clear Patrick, that the DOJ had been talking behind the back of your attorney with Hunter Biden's lawyers to come to a discovery agreement on interrogatories that was not fair to you. Were you surprised to learn this, Patrick?
Well, nothing surprised me at this point, Emerald. But yeah, given that it was flatly against a judicial order, the judge. So first of all, Hunter Biden is suing me for harming his sterling reputation. If that's not funny enough. And what's odd about that is for the first year of the Biden presidency, I actually laid off the Bidens. I tried to be respectful of the I was actually trying to keep things peaceful. I was personally respectful towards the Bidens. It was only after certain things happened that I started going after Hunter Biden at a personal level. And that was, I was in touch at the request of our government. I was in touch with the Iranian government, and I listened to something the Iranian government wanted to say. And in the process of those meetings, I became aware of something. Hunter was according to them, he was offering to take a bribe to them. I came back and reported it. And I even wrote about it in a book when later I wrote a book. So he's suing me for saying that he was influence peddling with Iran. Now, if I'm not mistaken, it's pretty clear at this point he's influence peddled with China. I think the DOJ came out, didn't they come out in the last days, the Biden administration, and basically say we'd have brought charges against him for influence peddling in Romania, but Joe is too gone to even prosecute anybody. But I didn't think it was even an open question that this guy peddles his father's influence. It's kind of funny, but that's what I'm getting sued for. But so I delivered all this stuff, including 3 stolen voice recordings, to the FBI, to a handler in the FBI. They want to depose that handler. The FBI said no, but the DOJ said no, but what we will do is you can submit a list of interrogatories and we'll respond. Well, that's crazy, because whoever does that in the DOJ with Biden, they can create carefully worded compound questions that make it easy, that make it, that let the DOJ say, oh no, that's a lie. If I'm not allowed to be involved in that process or cross-examine. So the judge said, absolutely not. The judge agreed, you can't do that. They can make someone available to be deposed or not, but you can't go back channel, and no more back channel communication with the DOJ, Hunter Biden. That's what he told their attorneys. We discovered last week that they are still in communication with a guy within the DOJ named Sam Bean, and in violation of DOJ's policy and in violation of orders from the top, and in violation of an explicit judicial instruction from an LA federal judge in California. There's a guy within the DOJ named Sam Bean who's still backroom scheming with Hunter Biden and his attorneys. Direct, in your face. That's giving the finger to a sitting federal judge when you're violating an order he gave a week before. So there's a guy within the DOJ scheming with Hunter Biden's attorney to try to help him in the lawsuit against me. I don't know who this guy is, but he's violated DOJ policy and a straight judicial order from a California federal judge. So we brought that to the judge's attention yesterday in a courtroom in LA. I haven't heard yet how it went, but this was all filed yesterday in LA, and there was a hearing about it. I heard the judge was really pretty angry, but I won't say anything more.
Yeah, that's the impression that I got. It sounded like going forward, if they do communicate, they're supposed to include your legal team on those communications, which is, policy and judge's orders. Also, I just want to remind people, we covered this on the show yesterday and the day before, that Sam Bean filed a motion to appear in that Zoom hearing, but he ended up not showing up. I'm wondering if he's getting cold feet now.
Well, now there's attention on him. And listen, that judicial order that said from now on, you got to include Patrick Byrne's attorneys in your communication. Mm-hmm. He gave that order a couple of weeks ago, and they violated. So he gave it again yesterday. But just so you're aware, when they did this, when they were doing it last week, they were already violating an order he had given previously.
I want to ask you, okay,
when they do this stuff, that's how you locate the deep state. There's some guy by hook or by crook, who's
Yeah.
trying to help out his buddy Hunter, who's on orders to help out Hunter from within his position within the DOJ.
Do you think Pam Bondi and the new higher ups at the DOJ are just not aware what's going on, that Bean has been operating without oversight in this particular matter?
I think that's probably correct. I think they were not aware this is going on.
Okay.
I'll make sure this link to this show gets sent to some people. It might get passed on to the right people.
There's some people watching too. Yeah, there's probably some people watching as we speak, Patrick Byrne. So let's see how things develop in the next week. Thank you so much. It's good to get to spend this much time with you and go through all that's happening. It's amazing, Patrick Byrne. As my producer said, it's never a dull moment when Patrick joins us, and that's absolutely true. Thank you so
Emerald,
much.
you know, Emerald, I'll tell your audience, Emerald knows a story that's coming that has got to be the biggest story of my lifetime, maybe in American history, and she's clued in on it. And the only place you're going to get the straight scoop on the story that's coming is Emerald Robinson. So tune in on Emerald.
Yeah, and that's why we're trying to lay the groundwork now, because it's a lot. It's going to take, there's a lot that people have to catch up with. So we're trying to educate and lay the basis for it now until we can share more. Thank you so much, Patrick.
Bye-bye, Emerald. Thank you.